Welcome to the show, guys. This is a massive episode and probably, I would say, actually the most important fantasy football video you're ever going to watch if you want to win your leagues, okay? We're talking fantasy football draft strategy, 10 tips to dominate. Now, I did this video years ago, ran an article on it, and it's been ranking #1 on Google for fantasy football draft strategy for several years. I want to update the video here for this new version for this year and talk about these points, these tips, this strategy to dominate your leagues, okay? This is winning strategy, guys. This is hands-on, practical stuff that nobody else is teaching because everybody else is so caught up in the cookie cutter copy and paste rankings that aren't going to help you guys win your leagues, okay? So if you guys are all about winning your leagues and you want to win, you want to smash your league mates, you want to start thinking outside the box and say, hey man, that makes sense. Wow, and have that aha moment when it comes to fantasy football, this is the video for you. So make sure you guys smash it, tap it, slap it, hit the thumbs up. I really want to get this message out to everybody. I am an independent. I do this on my own. I started this in 2016 because I did not like the way things were run in the fantasy football industry. I want to do it better, and man, oh man, have I done it better than everybody else. And I mean that in a humble way because the way that advice was given and continues to be given is not fair to you guys, okay? The copy and paste cookie cutter rankings just won't help you guys win your leagues, okay? It doesn't work, okay? Last year, for example, right? Everybody told you Tony Pollard round 1. The guy was not a true workhorse running back. He wasn't. Everyone told you T. Higgins round 2 last year, right? Wasn't the right guy, okay? The guy was a wide receiver too, all right? And you're drafting in round 2. You got to always aim high on those depth charts, right? You got to start thinking outside the box. You got to look for trends. Like last year, everyone told you Austin Eckler, 2nd overall. Dude, the guy was on a downwards trend, new offensive coordinator. Things changed, right? Coming off pinnacle years. So it's about thinking, right? They told you J.K. Dobbins, round 4 last year. Okay, well, that guy was coming off he's an injury-prone guy, right? And they're telling you drafted round 4, ludicrous. Dalvin Cook, round 5. Okay, he was entering a situation with Breece Hall. This is the type of stuff, guys, you got to start thinking, looking at situations and depth charts and analyzing it, okay? So I'm going to go through these top 10 tips here. I'm going to add some 2024 spin to it when we're talking particular players to kind of make you guys, give you guys some more practical stuff. Aside from the theory stuff, right? The practical stuff, you're going to get some names too that you can apply a little bit for this year as well. If you guys want all the answers, grab the 16-round drafts, which I've linked it below. Sleepers, breakouts, optimal players drafts each round for every single year, guys. I update this every single year, a new version. I update it up until the season starts. Grab 16 rounds. You're going to get a login, get access to all my mock draft sleepers for every year. 16 rounds is the game changer, guys. Rankings, all that is done. 16 rounds, grab it below. And also, guys, this is very, very important. I offer direct coaching as well. You can book a call with me, all at thefantasyfootballaccounts.com. I've linked it below as well. Direct coaching, 16 rounds. Guys, you're going to get the edge. And for in-season, I've got the Fantasy Frontlines Patreon group. You could join the front lines as well. Everything from in-season, which goes all year at the Patreon group, to direct coaching, to actually handle your actual leagues. Because sometimes people want direct access. They want to have specific questions. So I made that available. You can book me. There's a set calendar there. And of course, the 16 rounds, which is a big blanket that covers everything, gives you everything, okay? So everything there for you, linked it below. Let's get to these top 10 tips. Again, smash it, tap it, slap it. Lion mentality. You got the shirts as well. Hit the thumbs up, guys. Again, I am an independent. I do this, and I do it better than everyone else so that you guys actually win your leagues, all right? So let's go. First tip, right, on how to win your league. We're talking fantasy football draft strategy, how to smash your leagues in 2024. First thing you need to do, now some people say this is all outdated, Joe. It's not. You need to still, number one, load up on running backs. Why do you do this? Well, it's very, very simple. Number one, it's the most scarce position. Okay, so you have to load up on the most scarce position. Well, Joe, I like to go wide receivers. They score a lot of points, isn't that? Guys, there's tons of depth at wide receiver you can get later. Believe me, running backs is only a handful. We're talking Saquon Barkley, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson. Who else is there earlier on? CMC, which I think could decline this year, coming off pretty much 2 pinnacle years. You got Jonathan Taylor, who's been hurt the past couple years. Okay, I get it. You got Jahmyr Gibbs, who's sharing a committee with David Montgomery. Kyron Williams could have some upside, but I think Blake Corum could be a thorn in his side as well. And again, it's just off the top of my head in the early rounds. After that, man, it's like, okay, Derrick Henry, I think, still has a good year. A couple other guys. But after that, it starts getting dicey. Like, are we sold up? Pacheco could be safe. solid guy, but he's still relatively early. Outside the 3 rounds, it gets really suspect. That being said, there's a ton of sleepers this year at running back. Jonathan Brooks, Trey Benson's of the world, other guys that could emerge. Tajay Spears could be good. Again, if you want all the sleepers, grab 16 rounds. That being said, you still need to load up on this more scarce position. I speak with conviction on this because everybody else is going to be going wide receiver heavy, and there's a ton of other wide receiver ones you can get later. And I mean immense value, okay? I'm not going to go over on all this video, got to get 16 rounds, but there's a ton of wide receivers you can get later, okay? That are going to be wide receiver ones on their team, including a ton of rookies, which are going to absolutely take off this year, okay? But you need to load up on the running backs early. There's only a handful of them. It's a scarce position. You can get wide receiver ones later. This is very, very important, all right? Now, I did a mock draft this year, and I just went wide receiver heavy, and my best running back wasn't like, it was like Zamir White, and which I think has a ton of upside this year. He's going to be the one with the Raiders, but it's just like you don't feel as warm and fuzzy if you don't get, a Brees or Bijan or, a Derrick Henry or a couple of those guys early, and then you want to start loading up on other positions. Okay, so load up on running backs. Guys, I cannot emphasize enough. Don't be the guy in your league that starts, a guy like, I don't know, James Conner as their RB1 or someone who could potentially lose their job. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I saw one person go at 0 RB and his running back one was David Montgomery. Like, no, like you don't want David Montgomery to be your RB1. It's not good. Okay, guys? So load up on RBs. Tip number 2, this is very important, but it's common sense, but common sense ain't that common anymore. Okay. But this is very important. You got to know your league rules. Now, well, Joe, that's obvious. I know, but the way that the league rules are going to basically adjust to the way you draft. Obviously, like, listen to this. This is very, very important, right? So if it's PPR, I really still go for the best player anyway. I don't really, I may think of things that may benefit PPR. Like, for example, Ladd McConkey this year, I think he could be a PPR monster. I may consider him in the mid rounds, right? I may over maybe another player that's maybe not so reception heavy, right? Or when I'm looking at running back, I may favor a running back that catches the ball a little bit more than a guy that does if I'm in PPR. But typically, I'm still drafting the best player. League rules as well. You want to be able to identify, do I need a defense in this league? Do I need a kicker in this league? Is it 1 point PPR, half point PPR? Is it a super flex? If it's a super flex, how do I adjust my strategy to that? You really got to know the league rules, and particularly with waiver wires as well. What day is the waiver wire? Because you don't want to miss on a waiver wire pickup. This is important more for in season as well. You got to be on top of stuff because you don't want to miss things, right? If waiver wire is Wednesday or Tuesday and then you miss it for a day, you now missed a potential opportunity to pick up a stud for that year, right? It could be a stud. You missed the waiver wire wonder, as they say, right? For example, you don't want to miss out, right? Trade deadlines, right? You don't want to miss out if you want to get rid of a trade, if it's a dynasty league, whatever. You got to know the league rules. Just know this stuff. You don't want to miss out on dates because one little move could just mess you up on, potentially missing out on a person that could have changed your league in a different way or dynamic or missed a point, right? Also, with scoring wise, you got to know who to start and sit, right? So that's important as well. Is there a flex option? Should I flex this guy? Maybe if it's a super flex, it's like little things like that. Should I start my quarterback over a tight end in that super flex position? You should know it's a super flex. I mean, common sense stuff, but just know your rules inside out more than the commissioner. Okay. Know your league rules. Okay. Don't miss out on something that could be catastrophic to the finish of your finishing stats, right? You don't want to mess up your stats, okay? Be very, very good with knowing your league's rules, okay? Number 3, this is very, very important. Know the ADPs. The reason I say this is a very important one. You got to know the ADPs because there's once you've done the research, you've done the direct coaching with me, you've got 16 rounds, there's the players that you want, the optimal players you want, and the players you want to avoid, right? You got to know when they're coming off. And I was in a dynasty league, and I know where the ADPs are, and dude, there's certain players like Keon Coleman, who I like this year, for example, a lot. Good value, tons of upside, good quarterback throwing to him in Keon Coleman, freak athlete. He came off I think 2 rounds before he was supposed to, or 3 rounds before he was supposed to come off in a dynasty league. Going back to the league, to the tip number 2, know your league rules, right? I should have figured, it's dynasty. I knew rookies were coming off earlier, but he came off 3 rounds ahead of his ADP, right? So number 3 is, again, know the ADPs and anticipate that, these guys are going to come off a little bit earlier if they're really good, especially with the news, right? Because sometimes news comes out, player breaks out, does well in training camp. I like to draft earlier because of this, because I know who the breakouts are. And then when it actually happens in training camp and all this is coming to fruition, right? People start jumping on that hype train. And man, oh man, it's like, okay, their ADP jumped up. So you need to be aware of ADPs, especially when you're drafting. So you can do a lot of mock drafts, feel it out, understand, know exactly when your player is coming off, which again, I explained in 16 rounds, right? Direct coaching, that type of thing. Know when your player is coming off and anticipate that if you don't get them, like if you're drafting, at the end, 12, 13, swings around, you get the other two picks. There's certain players that are just not going to come back, on that swing if you're doing snake draft. You understand, guys? So know your ADPs. And if you're talking auction drafts, you still should know your ADPs as well. And then with 16 rounds, you know which players to avoid. And you want to queue up, if we're talking auction draft strategy, you want to queue up players that you know are going to fail. Last year, I queued up in an auction draft Austin Eckler because I knew he was going to come down. Let people blow their funds on them in the auction drafts, and then you're queuing up the players that you want, or other people are queuing it up and you get a better deal on them, right? So that's a whole other strategy as well, but know your ADPs. Tip number 4. Now, particularly for 24, this tip has a little bit of gray area. Wait on tight end, okay? Now, why do I say that? Last year, I was the only one telling you Laporta. Draft Laporta, he can be safe as your tight end 1 because I saw the opportunity. Now, there's a couple guys this year that I tell you in 16-round drafts which could be this year's Laporta, which I actually just revealed in my Patreon group, patreon.com/FF Counselor. I've also linked it below, the Fantasy Frontlines Patreon group. Join the Frontlines, guys. I revealed who this year's Laporta is, or possibly could be, because I don't know for sure. But I tell you exactly how to stack tight ends, right? But when I say gray area with waiting on tight end for this year, I'm almost comfortable with taking Laporta in round 2 because there's a whole disaster going on in the early rounds where everybody's drafting potential wide receiver 2s or 3s for very early, right? Guys like Waddle, guys like Stephon Diggs. Like, is Diggs the one on the Texans offense? Nobody really knows at the time of this recording prior to the NFL 2024 season, right? So everybody's just taking shots. They're just like, hey, man, I'm going to just take Nico Collins round 2. Nico Collins round 2, that's ludicrous because he was a top wide receiver last year because there was no Diggs. There was no Mixon. There was no Tank Dell. Tank Dell was busted up the entire season last year. Now you've got Dell back, who could be the one on that team because he's got that rapport and relationship with Stroud that's really good. In comes Diggs, who's a target hog. And Nico didn't have a whole lot of targets. I don't have the exact number in front of me because I'm not focused on stats in this episode. He had like 109, 10 targets or whatever it was. It's not a lot. And now he's going to get target diluted. So there's a whole mess going on in the early couple rounds where, we don't know who the one is, like Keenan Allen or DJ Moore. Very expensive. Who's the one? I would assume DJ Moore is for sure. He got paid well, but nobody really knows, right? And they got Rome Odunze there, right? So 3-headed monster situations, very early draft capital. Again, I'm going off on a tangent for tip number 4 here. Wait on tight end. In this case, Laporta seems like a viable option in the early rounds, round 2, because you're getting that almost guaranteed volume. Now, mind you, I like the value for Laporta last year, but either way, it is what it is. He's a round 2 guy. The sheep have jumped on him. And I think Jameson Williams, he's been doing well in camp as well. Maybe some more target dilution for Amon-Ra and Laporta, and Gibbs catching the ball in the backfield. So it's going to change. That dynamic changes a little bit. So you got to accommodate that. But what I'm saying is that maybe in this case, Laporta is a consideration in round 2. Kelsey's not a bad value, round 3 to 4 this year. But I typically wait on tight end. There is a couple of value tight ends you get after round 5 that can finish ahead of Laporta and Kelsey. Like I said, I mentioned 16 rounds, and some sleeper tight ends. The reason I wait on tight end typically is because as long as I get 10 points out of my 10 tight end every week, I'm pretty satisfied. I don't want to miss out on workhorse running back, ace wide receivers, or a possible ace quarterback in those early rounds, okay? But again, every league is different. Every year is different. Every ADP is different. But if you can wait on tight end, there is a couple good tight ends you can wait on that are primed for volume this year, okay? You can do that. And again, I explained all that in 60 rounds and in my Patreon group and direct coaching, all that stuff, okay? But typically you want to wait on tight end, load up on the running backs, an ace quarterback, and those wide receiver ones that can really, really hit the home runs with your team. And then with tight end, like I said, I waited on Laporta, knew who the Laporta was for last year, and capitalized that and got myself a tight end while everybody else was drafting mediocre tight ends, okay? Because there's a huge drop-off from the ace tight end to the other ones, but there is some other guys that could emerge, and you want to take some risks on those later on, okay? Tip number 5, I talked about this briefly. If you're listening to my other stuff, in my other points, anchor your team with an ace quarterback. I cannot emphasize how important this is. This year, there's a ton of question marks and a lot of upside at quarterback position. Okay, listen carefully. Anthony Richardson is a top 5 quarterback. This guy could absolutely go to the moon. But what I do is I anchor my team with an ace quarterback that's proven. With the quarterback position, you have more proof of concept. You have proven statistics over a couple of years, right? You can see more. Like a Mahomes, super safe. Josh Allen, a super safe guy, because we've got a track record of their consistency, whether it be passing, rushing, and fantasy points production. So I like to anchor my team with an ace quarterback as soon as I can without completely overpaying. When you take a risk like an Anthony Richardson or Jaden Daniels, who could absolutely take off this year, and I love them, right? But to me, it's a little risky with an early draft capital pick, right? An early draft capital pick in a guy like Anthony Richardson or Jaden Daniels, when I could go maybe a round earlier or so, or in and around the same ballpark and get myself a Josh Allen or a Mahomes or someone like that, right? Or a Hurts or someone like that, okay? So anchor your team with an ace tight end. Don't risk it with guys that are question marks. Again, Anthony Richardson, only 4 games last year, got hurt. But we don't know what to expect out of him. Again, could be an absolute monster when it comes to fantasy production, but we don't know. But you want to anchor your team with an ace quarterback. And here's another thing we're going to talk about later in a second. Back him up, which we'll get to in a second, okay? An ace quarterback, this is very important. You need that staple on your offense, and this is very, very important. And make sure you back him up, okay? Tip number 6, balance your roster. What does that mean, Joe? Balance your roster. Couple things. You want to have a lot of depth as well. So balancing your roster, meaning you want safe players, meaning in the early couple rounds, particularly, in the sneaky 7 formula, which I explained 16 rounds, but the first 5 picks, you want guys that are guaranteed volume. We talk safe and upside. Guys on top of the depth chart that are safe, secure, going to get a ton of volume. And what's happening, guys, in this year, what your sheepmates are going to do is they're going to draft Nico Collins round 2. There's no safety there, not knowing if Diggs is the one or if Dell's the one, or they're going to draft DJ Moore. There's no safety and security knowing that DJ Moore might not be the one. Rome Oduzde and Caleb Williams have been connecting really well in training camp, right? And Rome comes off a lot later. Either way, you're going to get a ton of target dilution with these 3-headed monster situations where you don't know who the clear-cut one is. So when I say balance your roster, in the early part of the rounds, you definitely want those safe guys, top of the depth chart, guaranteed ones on their team, right? In the earlier rounds. And then later, you can get those upside home run hitters, a little more risk, a little more upside players that could really, really boom and take your team to another level, right? Because no risk it, no biscuit. I'm an upside player. I never draft safe players, like unless it's early rounds. And I say safe meaning like they're still safe, but they're upside safe players. Like, a Breece Hall, tons of upside. Bijan, right? Derrick Henry, still got a ton of upside there, right? Even though he's a little older, but he's still got upside, right? Drake London, contract year, Kirk Cousins edition, there's some upside there. Garrett Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, there's a couple things with Garrett Wilson that could really, really, like, when I think about him, I think major upside, right? So upside, but yet still secure in their position early on. Does that make sense? And then later, home run hitters, all right? Also, what I mean by balance your roster for this tip number 6 is what I mean is you need to have positional depth. So meaning you don't just want 2 running backs for the entire roster and maybe get a couple scrappy home run hitters. You want to have it balanced, meaning that you have at least 3 or 4 RB1s or potential RB1s, and then you could take a risk. You want to have a balanced depth proportion, if that makes sense. Like, again, this is like a little more advanced stuff, but it's common sense to some degree as well. In other words, if for example, I go 0 RB and I get Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors are my 3 first picks, for example, and then I get a quarterback and I get a tight end, and then my first RB1 is, let's say, David Montgomery or James Conner. I don't feel that's balanced enough. I don't feel that strong. If David Montgomery is my RB1, I'm losing the balance there at running back. Okay, yeah, I feel a little more top heavy at wide receiver, blah, 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 right? I feel good. I got my quarterback in there, but my running backs are suffering, right? But if you go earlier and you go, let's say Bijan, right? And then you go Kyron, and then you go Malik, right? And then you go quarterback, and then you get 2 other wide receiver ones, which are available after round 5. Believe me, there's a ton of wide receiver ones. Feels a little more balanced, doesn't it, right? Because you got your running backs, right? You got your solid running backs. You got a couple wide receiver ones, right? You feel a little more balanced. So this is very, very important, is finding the sweet spot of balance on your roster, because again, this is going to really, really help you with your rosters. Okay. So that's why I told you this video is very, very important. Again, you're going to learn a lot of practical stuff. All right. So balance your roster from safe to upside players, and also balance in regards to depth. All right. Which leads me to tip number 7. Backup plan for a backup plan. Again, what do I mean by that? So if you're in I always use this as an example. If you're in a 1 quarterback league, have 2 quarterbacks. If you're in a 2 quarterback league, have 3 quarterbacks. If you're in a 2 quarterback league, always make sure you have 3 starting quarterbacks. Example, I waited in a 1 league. I got 1 quarterback, got a 2nd quarterback. Then I was like, okay, well, I need my 3rd quarterback. And then it was getting really dicey. Like, I'm like, okay. So I ended up getting Bryce Young as my 3rd quarterback because I know he's starting. If I had missed out on Bryce Young, it got really thin, man. It was like I was looking at Aiden McConnell and Gardner Minshew, who, again, either one of those could be good, but we don't know who the starter is. Then you're looking at the Jacoby Brissett's of the world. You're looking at all these guys that are hypotheticals on if they're starting. So you want to make sure, guys, you have a backup plan for a backup plan, meaning you got your starters. Guys, I cannot emphasize enough how important this is, okay? So backup plan for a backup plan, tip number 7. And then with running backs, like I said, if David Montgomery is your starter, you're in trouble. Like, I don't trust him. I want my workhorse beasts as my starters, and then I can get a ton of depth later. Those potential breakout guys, your Marshawn Lloyds, your Blake Corums, maybe your Trey Benson, Tajay Spears, those guys later to add to my depth and my backup plan, okay? Tight end as well. If you want maybe a Kelsey, back him up with an upside tight end later, okay? And I explained all those guys in the 16-round draft solution, which tight ends I like, right? So you're back, even though you got Kelsey round 3 or 4 or Laporta, you're still backing him up. A backup plan for a backup plan. Very, very important, guys. Always belt and suspenders when you're doing fantasy football, okay? Very, very important, all right? I'm going to get to tip number 8, which is one of the most important tips ever. But again, remember, grab 16 rounds, book a direct call with me. I've linked it below. And join the Front Lines group, guys. You're going to be all set. It's a complete experience for fantasy football, okay? Grab those below. Again, I want to make sure you guys have an ironclad roster. 16 rounds does it. Direct coaching, that just goes up and above. It's just amazing. And of course, guys, the Front Lines for more the in-season, the waiver wire, optimal DFS plays, everything you need, guys. And I do a Q&A there weekly where you can ask direct questions to me over a 24-hour period or a 12-hour period. I got to look at it. Again, last year, I think I did 12 hours, but I leave like a Q&A and you guys drop your question. I get to all of them, believe it or not. I'm dedicated. This is what I do full time. So I'm here for you guys. Join the Front Lines. I think you have to be part of mid-tier up in the Patreon group on that. So check into that. All the options are laid out there in the Patreon, patreon.com/FFcounselor, okay? So tip number 8, be very picky. Use the Cuddy system. What is the Cuddy system? I created this years ago when I was like thinking in my head, like, I'm very picky. What do I use in regards to criteria when I'm drafting a player? What do I personally do? So here's what I do when I'm personally drafting a player, okay? I got to make sure they fit this when I'm analyzing a player in my head. Are they consistent? Do they have upside? Do they have durability? Where are they on the depth chart? And what are they young, okay? The 2 ones that weigh heavy on me when I'm drafting that have been very beneficial to me is upside and youth, okay? Guys like Keon Coleman, get those home run hitters that can really win leagues. Last year, Laporta, upside youth. I didn't have any consistency to go on with Laporta, but I did know that he was high on the depth chart, okay? I knew that he was young. I knew he was durable. He hadn't gotten hurt yet, right? And he had that upside. Like, he was upside, youth, and depth chart. Those 3 really crushed it for me. Consistency, that's very important. Are they consistent week in, week out? But they've kind of had, the rookies can't really fall into this category unless you kind of go back to their college numbers. But consistency, are they consistent number-wise week in, week out, right? Year in, year out. How consistent are they? A guy like Josh Allen, really, really consistent. Great. Okay. Young, not as young, but still very viable for a quarterback, still pretty young, right? So consistency, upside, durability, depth, and youth. I really weigh high on the depth chart. I really weigh high on the youth, and I really weigh high on the depth chart, upside, and youth. Very, very important. Durability, of course, is very in the back of my head. That's why I avoided a J.K. Dobbins last year. That's why I'm not drafting players that have gotten hurt like J.K. Dobbins this year. I'm not going to be drafting him. Okay, I know he's got a great opportunity with the Chargers, could really boom this year, but I've been shown year in, year out, consistency, he lacks it, and based on lack of upside. There's some upside with Dobbins, right? But durability, that really crashed down this year for me for a guy like Dobbins, so he's out. Mind you, his upside is still there, but does it outweigh? So again, you got to kind of process the Cuddy system in your brain and make a decision. But bottom line is this: be picky. Everyone on your roster has to be young, has to have some upside, has to have durability. It has to factor in. Again, I make some exceptions for certain players some years. Like I said, Derrick Henry this year, I don't mind. I mean, there's some, the youth doesn't go his way, but everything else kind of falls into play for him. All right. But be careful. And again, if Derrick Henry crashes on me, I'm okay, because remember, tip number 7, backup plan for a backup plan. I'm cool. You know what I mean? So always, guys, backup plan for a backup plan. Again, tip number 8, be picky. Number 9, this is very important, guys. Okay. Wait on defense and kickers. Don't overpay. But one rule of thumb here, I won't spend too much time on this. I do like to anchor my team with an ace defense, okay? This is very important because I like to have a top 10 defense. And when you are looking at top 10 defense, take a look at quick glance at strength of schedule and make sure that your defense has relatively easy matchups, and look at what they did last year. I don't do consensus rankings, but this is where I kind of look at last year and say, how did the defense do? Now, mind you, there's a ton of changes defensively in the NFL draft that happen every year. I get it. But listen, don't overpay for defense. Try to get a top 10 defense. Take a look at strength of schedule. And kickers, I wait till like second last or last pick for kicker. I don't waste any time because I know who the sleepers are, and I'm too busy loading up on amazing talent for me to kind of overpay for a kicker, right? Kicker, I'm not really concerned. And most leagues are kind of doing away with defense and kickers anyway, especially independent defensive players. I was in a league with independent defense players years ago, and I hated it. It's the worst because one week a linebacker or a corner could have like 3 interceptions or tackles or sacks or whatever the position is and whatever they do. And then they put up like 50 points, and next week they don't, or like for the rest of the season, they do nothing. And there's so much volatility, and it really messes with the way that, all that skill, all that research you did to draft your skill positions, your wide receiver, quarterbacks, running backs, and then you have all the best players, and this guy's got a crappy team, but he has one good defense player one week, and you lose the championship because of one big week from a defensive player that just shouldn't have had 5 sacks that game. It's just that, they had a backup, the other team had a backup quarterback. They lost 2 of their O-line men, and now this linebacker just crushes it on this. Like, it's a mess. So I'd stay away from independent defensive players. I don't even mess with those, okay? But if you are looking at defense, try to get a top 10 defense if you can. When you start seeing defenses come off, I don't mind sliding in there and grabbing a top 10 defense. And then, again, backup plan for a backup plan. If you have a ton of depth roster spots, I'm in leagues where I have a ton of roster spots. There's like 12 roster spots, some like bench spots, I should say. Then I get 2 defenses, and I covered my bye week. I don't got to be going to the waiver wire. I like to, again, be very self-sufficient. When I draft a team, I'm not even thinking waiver wire. I'm thinking if the waiver wire happens, cool. There's a player that breaks out like Kyron last year. I'm looking to grab him for sure, right? I'm on top of things, right? But because I know my league rules, right? And I know everything. But I'm not really particularly interested in anybody off free agency or making trades with anybody because my team is my team. I'm solid. I'm good, right? So push for your commissioners to get more bench spots. That's my advantage to me. That's what I've done because I know who this, all the sleepers are, okay? That's what I like to do, all right? So last tip, this is probably the most, and I got a bonus one here for you as well. So there's 11 kind of, but top 10 tips, and then I'll give you a bonus at the end. Again, if you're new to the channel, if this is making sense to you, smash a tab, slap, hit the thumbs up. Very, very important. Last tip, guys, stray away from the consensus rankings and all other podcasts. Now, I've been doing this, and I got into this industry because I didn't like the way things are being done. And this year particularly, I've actually been made a point to listen to other podcasts and radios and other channels, and man, oh man, is it bad. I'm telling you guys, it is bad out there. And I'm like thinking to myself, there's a lot of practical stuff that I know. Example, like the Nico Collins, DJ Moore disaster with the 3-headed monsters. And I've been listening to other people do mock drafts, and nobody's talking about it. Like, they'll kind of say, yeah, I think out of these 3 guys, this guy's the best. And I get that you're kind of forming an opinion, but we're not talking about the main issue. They're kind of putting a Band-Aid on it. Like, the main issue here is that, like, there's major target dilution, and nobody, including the beat writers, know who the wide receiver 1 is on the Texans and Bears and even the Seahawks. And the Seahawks, everyone's drafted DK Metcalf early, but we're not talking about, Geno Smith. Like, he's not even that good, and he's dealing with a knee and hip injury already in the offseason here, okay? So you got to start thinking outside the box, guys. You got to use practical knowledge, all right? Now, again, I try to stray away because this is more of a practical strategy. I try to stay away from individual names and players because nobody really knows, right? There's uncertainty. And again, Nico Collins could come out and be a top 3 wide receiver. Again, don't get me wrong. But these guys are just drafting on ADP. Again, if you go last year, if you drafted ADP, Eckler busted, right? Round 1. Again, T. Higgins round 2. Tony Pollard round 1. Adams didn't have the greatest year, right? Waddle didn't have the greatest year. All busted on their ADP. Mike Williams was told to draft round 5. He didn't fit the Cuddy system at all. He wasn't consistent. He always got hurt. He gets banged up a lot. Dalvin Cook round 5. J.K. Dobbins round 4, and on and on and on and on, right? If you draft on rankings, you will lose. Sam Laporta last year ranked 21st amongst tight ends. They weren't thinking outside the box. They didn't get 16 rounds. They continue to draft on ADP, and they will continue to lose, right? So stay away from the rankings. Tip number 10, all right? This is very, very important. Rankings won't help you. Sheep's rankings will not help you. That's all I got to say. Use them as a guideline to know what not to do and players to avoid and know the ADPs, okay? So stay away from other podcast rankings. They're not here to help you. The reason why these guys don't take risks is because they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to take a risk. They're like, no one's 100% right in this. I'm not saying I'm 100% right, right? Like, I'm not. I was wrong on a bunch of guys last year, including Dameon Pierce, who was primed to be at RB1. He was coming off in the 4th round. I was wrong on him. I was wrong on a couple other guys, right? But as long as you're more right than wrong, which I am, right? And I know how to get an ironclad roster. I know how to get a backup plan for a backup plan. I know how to aim high in the depth chart, get the right sleepers, the right breakouts, the right players, which I do. And I do it every single year. I nail on a lot, right? And I'm staying away from the consensus rankings. I'm going to win. All you got to do is just think outside the box and not draft like everybody else and think, wait, hold on a second. That situation doesn't look good. Let somebody else play wide receiver guessing games in the early rounds while you're drafting up the workhorse, the scarce positions, the guy on top of the depth chart. Stay away from rankings. They won't help you, okay? Bonus tip, guys. All right, this is very, very important. Believe in yourself. Have a lion mentality. Have conviction, all right? Once you have your roster, but even before you have your roster, do your research, right? Get 16 rounds. Do all that stuff. But do your research. Have conviction in your players. If you're torn between 2 players and they're exactly the same, example, someone just asked me this year, Mahomes or Stroud? Okay, like, it's a coin flip. Like, I would only tell you my gut feeling. I'm not even going to tell you the answer because I will tell you that Mahomes feels safer. CJ Stroud doesn't have as much rushing upside, but CJ Stroud is due for a big year. His options are amazing. He's young. He's dynamic. He's got more ceiling, right? There's like, if you're torn between 2 players, go with your gut. But at the end of the day, you got to have conviction. You got to believe in yourself. You got to know you're going to win your league and smash everybody else. And once you've done all this stuff, you've loaded up on running backs, you know the league rules, you know your ADPs, you waited on tight end, got the right tight end, the upside tight end, you anchor your team with an ace quarterback and back them up. You have a balanced roster. You're picky. You went through the Cuddy system. You didn't overpay for defensive kickers. You knew who the sleepers were. You loaded up your team with that. While everybody's looking for waiver wire wonders, you've already got the sleeper, right? You stayed away from the consensus rankings. And then you have the conviction. Guys, it's really ironclad at this point. You guys are winners, okay? So, fantasy football draft strategy. A lot of people are putting out a lot of smoke and mirrors out there saying, 0 RB, wide receiver, this is 0 wide receiver, blah, blah, hero RB. Like, this is number 1 strategy. No. This is the practical stuff, guys, okay? So if this is making sense to you guys, smash it, tap it, slap it, book a direct call, direct coaching below, grab the 16-round draft session, and join the fantasy front lines, all right, guys? Fantasy football 2024 is here. This is your ultimate fantasy football draft strategy with practical advice, 10 tips to smash your leagues. There it is for you guys. Again, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Hit the thumbs up. Turn on bell. We're going to be doing lives. We're going to be doing breaking news, everything here on this channel, and we go year round, all right? Thank you for being here, guys. Fantasy football domination is upon all of us here watching. Lion mentality. Go smash your leagues. We'll talk soon, guys. I'm out.